Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. Today I'm going to be doing a book review of something fairly new. It's like a week or two old. The book is called The Body Scout by Michel. It is a science fiction work that is cyberpunk, specifically biopunk, and it reads a lot like a first wave cyberpunk book updated. It's noir, it's a little bit gonzo, it's sort of looking for the ways in which technological stuff can be deployed into subcultures in like weird and loss of agency type of ways. So there is a small horror element in that technology still is mostly there to take away agency or to represent addiction. And so it's got like a little bit of a technophobic bent, but not as much as other things. It's more neutral and indicative of the corporations present in the setting, for how they utilize the technology and how they deploy it against consumers, basically. It's so ubiquitous these days that you're either an oiler, which is a cyborg type person, someone who's had augments that are chrome, metal, stuff like that, or more likely you're on some kind of juice, is what it seems to be called, where you're in the biopunk end and you're using pharmaceuticals to alter your body in some way and augment that kind of stuff. So you can either swap out actual body parts that we've seen in other cyberpunk stuff, like new eyes, arms, legs, prosthetics for all that kind of stuff, including your special part if you want, and also going more into the ways in which biotechnologies can be used to sort of approximate the ways that we usually see cybernetics used. Also, an interesting thing about this book is that rather than with first wave cyberpunk, which is steeped in sort of technophobia, orientalism, and bad portrayals of marginalization, this book seems to be aware of that and has updated it. It still has a neo-noir type voice, but it doesn't take itself too seriously. It's if Blade Runner was married with The Fifth Element, kind of. There's no space stuff happening like in Fifth Element, but on the ground, and the tone in a gonzo type of way, sometimes serious, sometimes not, and sometimes let's just say odd things happening that the film just sort of rolls with, or in this case the book just kind of rolls with. I think that would kind of be a effective shorthand for trying to describe tonally what this book is like. In this world, the corporations present that we most interact with is the continuation of a futuristic MLB type situation where for a time there was a cybernetic league of baseball players where everybody was an oiler and they were jacked up, getting the new upgrades and competing with each other that way. And the main character was one of those players, but then the cybernetic league was decommissioned for one reason or another, and when that happened, he went to becoming a scout, which is sort of like a PI slash traditional scout, as in looking for players, although in this case the corporation wants him to look for a wide range of people, from scientists to pharmaceutical specialists to actual players with talent and whatnot. So he's kind of that, as well as a muscle man, and so he's wearing a lot of hats, and more is demanded of him, which seems very post-capitalistic and fitting of the genre, basically. We first meet our protagonist, Kobo, as a sort of down on his luck, which you would expect from a neo-noir type situation. He is in a lot of medical debt. The place that owns his body, because he is addicted to getting upgrades for his specific cybernetic parts. He has a complete left arm and hand that is mechanical. That was an upgrade for when he was pitching in that cybernetic league. And then he has some other stuff like an eyeball and a pinky finger, I think, as well. And he has to constantly be maintaining those parts, basically, which costs a lot of money. And then that same place that owns his body owns his apartment, so they're also his landlord. It's very cyberpunk in that way. And we meet him when he's on a job trying to recruit a scientist, in which he is sort of subtly undercut, drugged by a rival corporation, which is the Mets, and he works for the Yankees. And he's drugged, he passes out, and he loses his last sort of charge that he was trying to find, and ends up jobless at the same time as him discovering that his brother, he was adopted by the family at a young age, has died, and he is a Mets player, a very effective, it seems like a superstar type player, and he dies in a very horrific, weird sort of way that suggests murder. On the mound, I think he smashes like a homer, but then collapses, and he leaks out this weird toxic stuff where it's a mixture of blood, gray matter, and the pharmaceuticals that they're pumped with, because instead of using cybernetics to enhance, they went with the biopunk angle, and they're now pumped full of all these different drugs that augment them instead. So it's legal, and they don't know the long-term effects of using them, but the sort of generic brand of those things is what the entire rest of the population uses, unless they are an oiler, which seems to be a pejorative and a sort of old-timer in this futuristic setting. The Mets hires him as their own sort of, not scout, but PI, looking into how his brother died, because he was a valuable member of the team, and they want to know what's going on because it's spinning bad PR for them and costing them money. Another character works for the Sphinxes, and she is named Dolores and is a scout as well, basically. And she is in a direct competition with both the interests of the Mets and the Yankees, obviously, because she's looking for talent and looking for a way in order to gain access to a specific player that is a lead for his brother's death. He has to re-engage with her. She is his ex-girlfriend. She's deaf. She has this cool goggles rig that basically signs ASL to her for all the things going around, and I thought that was an interesting bit of inclusion. As they reignite their old relationship, she was also a member of the Cyborg League, and interestingly, all of it seems, for the MLB, every league except for one team that are called sort of antiquated, have moved to a gender-neutral team base. They hired non-binary people, women and men on the teams, and she was one of them. He also ends up being tailed by a mysterious Neanderthal, is what they're called. It's people in Russia who were cloned with biotechnology from fossils, so sort of like Jurassic Park, where they injected Neanderthal DNA into a cell of a sapien in order to create a life form that was a little bit different. And I think it was a scientific study or something. But this Neanderthal person has his own sort of faction and a group behind them. And simultaneously, a girl who he's never seen before but looks fairly familiar is also tailing him. And so there's this push-pull of different factions weighing in on him, including actually a team of Muscle, these two twin women who seem a little strange. They have like a comedic act that seems kind of like out of the Coen brothers, where they're like joking around and stuff, but will also mess him up. They're trying to get install payments back from his medical loan from him as well. So there's a lot of different factions he has to interact with and juggle at the same time, and we have to figure out what each party may have played in the death and or how it relates to him as he navigates this futuristic world. Michel also does a really good job of doing basically info dumps, but in a very organic way. Anything that only strictly pertains to Kobo as he is navigating his world is imparted, but it does a really good job of world building very subtly and bite size, giving you pertinent details about the setting, all the way from flashbacks from Kobo's life, stitching together his past basically, especially as it pertains to Dolores, his ex-girlfriend, and also his specific relationship with his brother. All of that comes to the forefront as he navigates to a stall and orders a very specific street food. And it mentions that, some meats are unable or unobtainable now because they don't exist. And so there's the typical cyberpunk street fare where the impact of the environment is being taken into place, but then it also springboards off of that and we get a memory of him and his brother and whatnot. I think that's done quite well. Each chapter is 3 or 4 pages. It has a title that is very specific and usually is trying to generate some anticipation of what is happening and what was just led as a cliffhanger prior to it. So it's very fast. I wouldn't say it is strictly commercial fiction because it does seem like Michel is deploying a very specific voice with precision in order to kind of toe a line between commercial fiction, which is subversive of first wave cyberpunk, which tended to be a little bit more cerebral with, say, Gibson. So I think it's just really trying to package the elements of science fiction / cyberpunk and biopunk into a format that is just updated, less problematic, easy to consume, accessible, and has some representation that is done well as well. It also eschews the Orientalism problems that is pretty predominant in first wave cyberpunk. The technophobia that is so predominant in first wave comes from yellow fever, basically. It's a racist idea that Japan and other Asian countries that were manufacturing things overseas were going to literally take over and subsume American culture and dominance, basically. Whereas this has none of that I noticed. It substitutes it instead for corporatocracy, and instead uses baseball and its vernacular and jargon as a shorthand for the aesthetic that is still quite appealing and interesting, and again, pretty subversive of the genre. I haven't really seen any sports drama at all coupled with cyberpunk, even though some cyberpunk stories will talk about in performance enhancements and things like that. It's such a natural leaping point into sports that I just haven't ever read. Maybe some cyberpunk books do and I just haven't read it, but it seemed quite novel to me and still able to capture an aesthetic that is intrinsically Western, but evocative, that everybody can sort of conjure images and is aware of sort of where sports is situated in right now, with what they're kind of trying to make it still modernized and capitalistic and stuff like that. He goes to a game, for instance, and there's a whole bunch of people sitting there with not goggles but full head visors, and they're eating and whatnot, but they're conveying what they're watching as a ticket holder to viewers at home that don't want to go and look. So all the seats end up being taken. There's a lot of clever little small bits of world building like that in pretty much tucked away in everywhere. And of course, there's other factions, some that are pro biotechnologies, some that are diametrically opposed to it, which make an appearance as well. All in all, I think that if you go in and expect a fun sort of gonzo, but also aware of the political and socio-economical problems and sort of rhetoric that comes up in cyberpunk, if you go in and expect that, you'll get it, and you'll still be consuming something that is, like I said, much more updated. Just don't expect something as serious or literary as Gibson. It's more fun and playful than it is serious and gruesome about the loss of agency than most cyberpunk. It's a little off kilter. I like things to be a little bit more serious. I was hovering around a 3-star rating for it. I think it does what it says it does on the tin very well. I gave it 1 extra star because I saw what it was doing with genre and I got a lot of satisfaction from that. I really like taking a look at different works in the subgenre, comparing them and seeing what's innovative or not. And I think this does a lot of interesting stuff in that respect, and so I got a lot of satisfaction from it. Depending on if you're picking this up as just like a science fiction person who wants a very serious story, you might be picking up the wrong book for you. But if you're looking for some particularly cyberpunk book or biopunk book that's updated and a little bit gonzo, or science fiction that's just a little bit gonzo if you don't care about the particular tropes that it's bringing, I think it would still be, just like me, something that exceeds your expectations at the very least. If you've read The Body Scout, tell me what you think in the comments. I'd love to have a chat about it. It seems like not a lot of people are chatting about it just yet because it's brand new. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts, especially if you're into cyberpunk and biopunk. Otherwise, I will see you next video. Bye.